because of COVID and because of how it's affected everyone, I wouldn't let that stop you from necessarily applying this next year.
Ask the Dean, episode 24. My friend Rachel Grubbs. How are you?
Hey, Rachel.
I'm good.
You are good. Smiling. I'm good. Dr. Scott Wright, how are you?
Doing well. How are you, Ryan Gray?
I'm excited. I'm excited to start a new day, new week. It seems like the year is coming to a close very quickly. So I'm excited to see what the rest of the year brings and what next year brings. Yeah. And I'm even more excited for the new features of Mapped that should be launching here in the next couple weeks. Our feedback algorithms that we can start creating now on our back end and really help students get an idea of what to do next. So
that's right. That's right.
Rachel, you want to talk about that briefly for a second?
Yeah. So for those who are watching this on the replay later, as of today, when we're recording, which is Monday, November 9th, the feedback program is still in development, but we've made enough progress on the development side, on the staging version of our website, that we've got about 12 or 15 Mapped members who have volunteered to do some testing with us. And, that's a safer way to do this. We want to have a couple dozen people play around with it before we launch it to, all 2,000 users, because we want to make sure it's working well. So what we'll be doing is playing with the various queries we want to do, making sure that there's no bugs that we missed in the earlier stages of development without students. And really just, I've drawn some examples in the past that continue to be relevant, right? So what we're looking for are things that are common enough that we can query them because they're based on certain logic points, but still important enough that you need that personalized feedback. So a classic example is if you got a C-, not just in any course, but in a course that was supposed to qualify as a pre-medical requisite course, then it won't qualify and you'll have to retake. So if that happens anywhere, we want to flag that for you. Now it is in theory actually already flagged because we won't let it count as a prereq fulfillment in our dashboard, but just sort of one more level of, well, why did that not come up? Was that a bug? So now there'll be the paragraph from us explaining, hey, when this happens, this is the result and this is why. Another thing that happens is not all schools accept AP credit. So if you have AP credits, those are supposed to be your prereqs. We'll be advising you to check into whether or not they qualify for your target schools. And then what we hope to get to is some stuff that is maybe a little more nuanced and isn't always as well known. And a lot of that is going to involve multiple if-then sequences, right? So like if your GPA is between X and Y and your MCAT score is between G and H, and I'm deliberately not using numbers right now because I don't want people to panic from my off-the-cuff examples, then we may say something to you about, hey, these numbers make us nervous. No, we don't think numbers are the whole story. That's been a big part of what we try to always explain to people. But, if your stats are, just to give an extreme example, if your GPA is a 1.3, we're going to be talking to you about whether or not it's time to apply, So we'll be trying to give that kind of feedback so that although you don't get, necessarily one-on-one attention with Dr. Gray or Dr. Wright or myself, you are benefiting from our expertise because we'll be the people creating these queries and writing these responses that are, almost like FAQ, but instead of a giant list of FAQ, and you have to find the questions that are relevant to you, we're going to have the tool look at your data and give you those answers immediately based on the data you have without you having to ask the question.
No.
I'm excited.
Me too. I am excited. I'm excited for this first question that has come in that I see here. Dr. Wright, you may have some good knowledge on this. So a student asks, do medical school executives or adcoms have thoughts on applicants who have political aspirations? Some employers frown upon political affiliation when you represent the company.
Mm-hmm. Well, so the short answer is basically no. I mean, it doesn't come up very often in an application, in my experience, where an applicant will say, I want to do X, Y, or Z in my future, or I see in my future that I'm going to be running for office, or that I'm going to do, that would be pretty unusual.
Yeah.
But to the point of the second state, or the sentence that ended out this question is, it's much different. I understand why some employers might, frown, as he puts it, frown on political affiliation when you represent the company. You keep in mind that when you're a medical student, you're not representing anybody. You're not representing that school. You're not representing anything but yourself.
Yep.
You're not getting paid or whatever. And so I would say this is unusual. And just because you become a medical student doesn't mean you erase every other part of your life. And so if you put in your application that you are interested in now the question may be, if you go into a lot of detail about political aspirations, then the question might be, well, why does this kid want to go to medical school in the first place? Why does he want to go to law school, or go straight into politics or whatever? So the question may be more surrounding motivation for medicine. But even at that, I mean, there's a lot of avenues for students to take advantage of things as they come, opportunities that come along in terms of politics within the context of medicine, that I don't even think that would necessarily come up, be a negative for an admissions committee. So I would say no. I don't think that this is an issue that would be a big deal for an admissions committee.
Let's try to make it a little bit more specific to right now, with kind of the in the history of the world, the largest civil rights movement going on right now, hopefully still going on. There was at least one school that had an issue with Black Lives Matter protests at the school, sent an email, right. Lots of upheaval around that.
Right.
When students are looking at schools and they have they want to be an ally, they want to be an advocate, how can they potentially steer clear of schools that may not be okay with their advocacy?
Yeah, that's another good question, and I think I would say that's going to be difficult to ascertain. I mean, you'd have to depend on their website, information on their website. You'd have to depend on contacts that you have at the school, such as current students or former students, alumni, to give you an indication of that. I think that'd be pretty difficult to figure out about what, how a school might react to a particular, thing. Now, I don't know the details about the particular school that you're mentioning, but, I have seen schools where there was, a movement afoot that really galvanize the students in a particular direction or everything. And the school is always, you have to understand the school's always going to look out for the school.
Yep. And
is really going to pursue, if something is disrupting the curriculum, is disrupting the avenue that the students have in terms of the course of their studies, then the school's going to be concerned about that and is going to reach out. The student affairs people are going to be all on top of that and reminding students that, their number one focus has to be medical school and what they're doing there. Doesn't mean they erase the ideas or that they don't participate in things, because a lot of schools have had, rallies or whatever where, the students were in support of a particular social cause or something like that. But when it gets beyond that, when it gets disruptive to the institution, so that's where it becomes a problem. But I think it'd be kind of hard to figure that out, barring any kind of insider knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I was wondering about that is, so we've talked a lot about it's bad to show up to interviews without questions. And I was thinking about asking about social causes or diversity or allyship missions in the interview. And the reason I want to kind of pose it to you is it puts an onus on an interviewer who may not be able to speak for the school. Yep. What example I'm thinking of is Ohio State Med is doing really well with their work on acknowledging unconscious bias, right? And they're not even trying to eradicate bias. They're just trying to make it go from unconscious to conscious, right? That's the interim goal for them. So I know there are people at Ohio State Med that can speak at that program eloquently, but I don't know that every interviewer could.
Correct.
And so I'm just wondering, in a situation like that, that's sort of an easy example because there's enough on the Ohio State website. You can just go check it out. But I was thinking of it, if you're trying to dig into that stuff, if the interview's not the right place to ask, then do you think web research is better?
Well, I think I don't think it's a problem to ever reach out to the dean of admissions or director of admissions and ask a question about that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I agree that not all interviewers are going to be well versed in things like that. I mean, when you consider that at most institutions, their cadre of interviewers might be in the hundreds. And so, it's difficult to, train everybody on every last detail of everything that's going on at the school or whatever. And so, I think that sometimes the interview, I'm not opposed to a student asking that in an interview, but I think you have to sort of be realistic about what response you might get. And, that the interviewer may say, well, I don't really know anything about that, which shouldn't necessarily be interpreted as negative or positive. They just, they're just not, they just don't really know about that. But I definitely think that if a student feels strongly about a particular issue or social cause or whatever, reaching out to the institution, even on interview day, the student might have an opportunity to ask current students about what they're doing, ask the admissions dean what things are going on at the school that are in line with, that particular student's cause or concerns or whatever. So
that's a good point. Lots of unofficial chances,
absolutely,
med students, and that's smart.
And even in the virtual environment, a lot of medical schools are having virtual sort of get-togethers. So it's not just one-on-one. They're doing virtual happy hours or things like that really gave you an opportunity to ask questions.
Mm-hmm. I will just say as a footnote, this is purely personal, that as a voter, I like the idea of some people in my legislature who have science and medical knowledge.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, obviously that's not the only expertise we want in our legislatures, but I would love to see, if we're thinking about our legislatures as a symphony, right?
Yes.
And maybe medical knowledge is the oboes. I played oboe. We're like the Marines, the few, the proud.
Oboe. I'm not an oboe.
Fine.
I'm cool like a saxophone. Come on.
Yeah, really. The trumpet.
Trumpet has lost its cool after.
Okay, we'll withdraw any specific instrument and just say, I like the idea of a symphony. I want diversity of all kinds in my legislature, which in my mind includes expertise.
Correct.
Correct. So I mean, correct. Again, I'm not a med school admissions committee person, but if you're thinking I want to be a doctor and that's true, and you're also thinking maybe you have political aspirations on top of that, I think that's possible, and I think
absolutely, absolutely, I agree completely.
Nope.
Okay, let's see. So this question actually came in before we went live, so I wanted to type it up so we could put it here. So that looks like it's me, but it's not me asking.
Any advice for non-traditional low GPA students when it comes to making a list of schools to apply to? Should we use the MSAR? The MSAR, for those who don't know, the Medical School Admissions Requirements, is the service that the AAMC kindly sells to students that aggregates all of the school information in one place. All of the MD school information in one place. What students use it for the most is to look at average MCAT and GPA, the median MCAT, median GPA, and make a school list based on that. which I tell students, don't do it that way.
I agree. I agree.
I think this question is based around, I think, faulty assumptions that having a low GPA means that only some schools will look at you. Mm-hmm. Now, it basically ignores the fact that it's a non-traditional student who's going to bring a lot of intangible traits and skills. It's going to ignore the fact of all of the other experiences and who they are as a person to the table, and it completely ignores the trends of what that GPA actually looks like. So it could be a low GPA with great trends because they're a non-traditional student who may have gone to undergrad for art or history and didn't do well because they didn't know what they wanted to do with their life. And now as a second career, they're like, I need to be a physician and I'm going to go crush my post-bac classes. But I'm still going to end up with a quote low GPA. So lots of assumptions there that I think where students go wrong making their school lists and not doing enough research into the school and the mission and the fit and everything else that goes along with how to look at a school. Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I think about that question is the student says low GPA, non-traditional low GPA student, and I think one of the questions in my mind is, what does low GPA actually mean within the context of this student's understanding of the process? They may say 3.6 is a low GPA. Yeah. I mean, I've had students who come in and say, oh, my GPA is so bad, and it was a 3.4. Yeah. And I'm like, well, number one, that's not an awful GPA, and I wouldn't categorize it as low. It's not, it's maybe below the mean for most schools, but I certainly wouldn't say it's low. Now, if it's 2.3, then that's a low GPA, and there's going to need to be some stuff going on for that student post-bac wise to really prop up some things. But so I totally agree with you, Ryan. I think that there's a lot of work that students need to do that is non-number oriented. That really can help them focus themselves on schools where they seem to be a good fit. And again, just as you said, the MSAR really doesn't address any of the DO schools. Nope. And so I think, that's where you have to sort of cross over. And that's so unfortunate in this country that we don't have some sort of somewhat authoritative source that says, here's everybody. Now that's, I think, part of what we're doing in MAPT and the school list and stuff in MAPT is trying to reach that point where it can, it conglomerates everything in one place. And so that's another big part of what MAPT can do for students, and to give them that info that can be very helpful. So. Yeah. Looking at it from not a conspiracy theorist level, but more from a negative side of things, you have to understand, talking specifically about AMCAS, if you look over the course of the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years, the number of schools that students are applying to keeps going up. And that is because we have this MSAR, which is now digital. Before it used to be a book. Mm-hmm. Now it's digital. And so students are going in and they're doing this shotgun approach, going, okay, here's my GPA, here's my MCAT. I'm going to apply to all the schools that match that, and they're not doing any work. Right. And the AAMC isn't providing any extra info to the students to guide them on how to properly pick schools. Right. Because at the end of the day, the more schools that you apply to as a student, the more money the AAMC makes. And so there's a very backwards or what you might call bass-ackwards. Bass-ackwards monetary incentive for the AAMC to obfuscate a lot of this information. And so that students don't know what to do, and they apply to more schools thinking that's what they should do, and it's just more money for the AAMC. Yep. No, you're exactly right. I remember the days when the MSAR was a book, and I would have a student come walking into my office, and they had this pretty thick book. It's probably 1.5 inches big, and they would have sticky notes everywhere, and flagged all these different places and highlighted stuff and everything. And I sort of lament the idea that it's so easy these days just to
focus in on the numbers
Yep.
with those filters and stuff, because it really doesn't allow students the opportunity to pick up a book and have to read through stuff and have to really investigate things. So there's an upside and a downside for digital things. This is definitely a downside to the process, I think.
Yeah. Downside for the student, upside for the AAMC.
Well, yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's exactly right.
Oh, AAMC. I love them. What would be your suggestion for a student who has international credits, many, whether to even put them in the application if you can't get a transcript from the school and only from an evaluation agency?
Yeah, this is a big question, and I think there's an upside to putting them on there simply because it shows a history of coursework and stuff like that, and it shows that you haven't just been off the map completely, and then all of a sudden you show up in the U.S. and here you are. Yep. The student doesn't indicate here whether they are in fact an international student or they just have international credits, so that kind of could affect things. We've had over the course of years in the Texas system, students who went to a school where it was impossible to get a transcript. It was either in a war-torn country or the school had ceased to exist, or there's kind of a variety of reasons why transcripts might not be available if now or ever, and so if you don't have a certified copy of your transcript, then it becomes pretty difficult to do that. But I think if you have the ability to put them on there, I'd go ahead and put them on there. It's going to depend a lot on what kind of results that will get in front of an admissions committee or whatever. But if you got an extra hour or two to put them in there, why not?
Yeah. Yep. I think the big thing to think about here is always, my go-to is go read the instruction manual, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Rachel is our in-house instruction manual expert, but the instruction manuals for international schools is completely like gibberish. And yes. I think the thing that I always come back to, and again, every application service is probably going to be a little bit different, but for AMCAS, what I always think I remember, and Rachel, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that if those credits have been transferred into your U.S. school for credit, then you're going to have to put those on your application. Yep. You're going to have to get the transcript for those.
You've got it right. So it's really tricky. And yeah, same thing. I want to say, go to the handbook. Yeah. For mapped members, so anyone watching live, the handbook's really easy to find because you can just go to mapped resources, and I've got it linked for you there. Mm-hmm. For anyone catching the replay later, just Google. It's the AMCAS. Right now would be the 2021 handbook. At some point, we'll toggle over to 2022. And just go read all the detail about international.
Yeah.
What I remember is that it's required if your credits have transferred to the U.S., and it's also required even if they haven't transferred, if the work you did was technically at an international med school.
Yeah.
So there are some cases with international undergrad where if you can't get the transcript, you're not required to submit those courses. Right. But again, it's very, very nuanced. I've been helping several different students with these questions for the last few months, and in many cases, no matter how much we sort of poured over it and read it and tried to use our best critical thinking skills, where we landed is you need to go call the AAMC.
Yeah.
And maybe also a COMAS and maybe also TMDSES, depending on where you're applying.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a complicated one. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Sorry.
Cool.
Let's see. Next one. Oh, this is nice.
Hey guys, hope you're doing well considering all that is going on in the world. What are you talking about? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm looking more closely at my school list. I'm applying both DO and MD, and I'm unsure of how many DO versus MD I should put on my list. Scott, what are your thoughts with this?
Well, number one, I give you credit for investigating both DO and MD schools. And I don't think, so my feeling about the number of schools that you should be applying to, number one, it's an issue of finances. Money, it costs money to apply. Now, again, I'll give a big shout out to the Texas system, who has a flat fee, regardless if you're applying to one or all the schools. It's all the same. Doesn't matter. Unfortunately, the other services don't do it that way. But at some point or another, it's gonna be about money. It's gonna be how much money do you have to apply, and most students don't have an infinite amount of money, and so that in some way or another becomes an issue of capping it at a certain number of schools, because you have to you run out of money. Because you also have to consider that not only are there the primary fees, but many schools have secondary application fees that you have to pay too. So if you're going to apply to a school and then not do the secondary, then it's pointless. So you have to consider all the sort of nuances of the process in terms of considerations for the financial picture. Now, having said that, I think that the number of schools, I think, is, in my view, I think is really more important to evaluate. What are you looking for in a school? What appeals to you? What are the big issues for you that you really want to focus in on, and then identify schools that really fit the context of what you're looking for. I think that's really important in a process where, I've heard so many students before they applied to a school, they got an admission offer to that school, and then they're starting to question, well, do I really want to go there? Well, why did you apply there if you don't want to go there? It sort of doesn't make any sense. And it goes back to this sort of shotgun approach that you mentioned earlier, this sort of, I'm going to apply to, I had a student one year who applied to 32 schools. Now, I can't imagine what that cost her in terms of all the different fees.
I can. If you go to appexpenses.com, you can calculate it.
You can calculate it out. And, it was in the, multiple thousands of dollars. Yep. And that was back in the day where, as we know, where you were traveling to schools to interview and stuff. So I had always thought that this girl spent probably somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000 in the whole process, which is just insane in my view. But if she had the money, then okay, it's her deal. But so I think money's a big deal. I think philosophy, your philosophy, matching it with the school's philosophy in terms of curriculum, et cetera, is very important. So I don't think there's a magic number that says you're going to apply to this many schools or that many schools, or I think it has to be very individual to you as an applicant to find, and that this is where it takes a lot of time, spending a lot of time with MSARB, spending a lot of time on school websites, spending a lot of time with the ACOMAS and other, other things where you really get a good, as much as possible, a good sense of what the school's all about and what it cares about, and then you make those decisions.
Yeah. Yep. Appexpenses.com. Go check it out. Yeah, I think I think at the end of the day, really just to hit home, I don't necessarily like to think about it in terms of how many MD versus DO. I think come to a conclusion budget-wise, how many schools you can afford. And obviously not trying to max out, but like, well, I do have $20,000, right? Well, don't do that.
Right.
I saw a student, I think on Reddit, I think it was a Premed hangout, a student saying that their friend applied to 60 schools. And I was just like, that is just way too many schools. Not, again, if it's not a financial burden, great. I'm glad you can do that. But from a mental exhaustion standpoint of writing all of those essays, there's a diminishing return there as you keep going. And so I tell students not to apply to more than 25 schools, and that's still a lot. But really figure out how many schools and then start digging into where do you want to be and what type of environment do you want to be in, and then you can go to the medical school map that I have on medicalschoolhq.net and really just hone in and go, okay, what schools are in the areas that I want to be in, and if they happen to be a couple DO schools and one MD school, great, add those to your list and go from there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Agreed. Agree with that.
Greetings, Premed host back here. Regarding clinical experience, how much clinical experience is too little? How much wood could a woodchuck chuck? Dr. Wright. I've shadowed a physician in person before COVID, BC, and have been doing e-shadowing with Dr. Gray. I also had scribing and hospice volunteer opportunities lined up, but got postponed or canceled due to COVID. Thanks, COVID. Before I could start, I want to apply next cycle, but I'm worried I won't have enough clinical experience or shadowing. This is the dilemma du jour every day for every student going through this process is if I want to apply come May 2021, and we got news today as we're recording this that the vaccine, at least from Pfizer, looks very promising, but we're not going to have enough vaccine to vaccinate the whole country by at least until the end of 2021, maybe.
Right.
These experiences are not going to be had unless you actually are lucky enough to have a job or lucky enough to be well enough and aren't worried about exposing yourself to get a job. Students aren't going to get these things. How can they analyze whether or not this is something they should move forward with or put off a year?
Yeah. Well, so, we've talked a lot about this, about how COVID has interrupted everything and how admissions committees are not immune to the things that have affected their own institutions. And now, having said that, I do think the way that this applicant or the way the student describes it, they do have pretty limited amount of experience, which is concerning. Doesn't really say how much. I guess they say shadowed a physician in person, don't really know how much of that, and then e-shadowing. In and of itself, that's pretty limited. But I wouldn't, because of COVID and because of how it's affected everyone, I wouldn't let that stop you from necessarily applying this next year, particularly if you continue with the e-shadowing. Really put that out there as this is pretty much all you could do, and because of COVID and that you had stuff lined up, but it wasn't kind of fell through, and then if the amount of clinical experience was too limited and you don't get in, then obviously the next cycle you will need to have done some stuff over the course of that cycle to improve on that clinical, on that clinical experience. Whether that's possible or not is yet to be determined in terms of what's going to change over the course of the next months and over the course of the next year or so. But I think because of as I said, because of the difficulties that all students are having in terms of getting clinical experience, I don't think that should stop anybody from applying in and of itself. I think, you don't know how, the only guarantee that I've ever known was if you don't apply, you're not going to get in. And so, if you've got the money to go ahead and apply and the time to spend doing it, I'd say go ahead and, take a shot and see what happens.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, right, again, everyone is going through this, unless you happen to be working in a clinical setting, getting that experience. Right. And medical schools are going through this with their students as well, so they're understanding. And I think there's going to be a lot of flexibility moving forward in terms of hours and how schools sort and display and filter based on number of shadowing hours, clinical experiences, etc. The only caveat I would say to that is just make sure you have enough experiences so that you understand what you're getting yourself into, and you can write a compelling personal statement that talks about why you want to be a physician. If COVID has prevented you from doing that, then I don't think you should be applying to medical school to begin with yet.
Agreed. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And, just I will say I heard from a student recently within the last week or two that they had interviewed at a school, and in a virtual open session, the admissions dean or one of the bigwigs of the school was asked, how has COVID affected how you view your own curriculum and the adjustments that you've made? Has that changed how you may move forward in the future? And the response was absolutely it has. I think schools are recognizing that a lot is possible, that they were probably not willing to go down roads that they have been forced to go down now, and they're gonna see that performance has not been affected. Performance of the medical school students has not been affected, and that the curriculum is probably much more, flexible than it maybe had been anticipated that it was in the past. And so anyway, but I thought that was an interesting response from one medical school dean.
Yes. How would you go about dealing with an overly negative or downright mean pre-med advisor? Someone I have to interact with for a committee letter.
Wow.
And here is one of my biggest reasons for why I don't like committee letters. There are going to be people who either you don't get along with them or they don't get along with you, or a combination of both. And now this person has your future potentially in their hands.
Right.
I don't think that that power dynamic is fair to the student at all.
Yeah.
My bottom line is you don't interact with them and you don't get a committee letter, and you just go about getting individual letters.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's completely the way I would go. I would say, and if you got asked, by an interviewer or by the admissions dean or whatever, why you didn't have a committee letter, I would just be honest and just say I had conflict with them, or they were this way or that way or whatever, and I just chose to go my own direction.
Yeah.
Or you don't have to say that at all. You could just say, I just chose to go my own direction, and leave it at that.
Yeah, I think there's a balance there of not being overly negative and placing all the blame on them, right? Showing some
correct.
Some I can't think of words today. I don't know why. some maturity and going, you know what? It wasn't a great relationship, and there were probably some things that I didn't do right, and I just decided to move on. Right? It doesn't have to be long at all.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I would say too, having been a pre-med advisor, and I'm sure that there were students that thought I was.
Every student loves you, Scott. Everyone.
I remember one particular student who, my very first session with that particular student, I looked at her information, and she had very limited clinical activities. I mean, it was almost nothing. Great grades. I don't recall the MCAT score, but anyway, she had very limited contact with healthcare, if any. And my question to her was, why should a medical school let you in? You don't really know anything about what you're getting into. How do you say I want to be a doctor and you really have no context for knowing?
But Dr. Wright, the Facebook quiz said that was my career.
Yes,
that's what I should do.
Yes, that's right. Well, she got really, really upset with me.
Yep.
And she complained to, higher ups, and she was not a happy camper. And now, to her credit, later on, she came back and was like, hey, I get it now. I really sort of missed the boat, and you were right. And because I think what she did, sort of begrudgingly, she started getting some experience, and then she began seeing, oh, holy cow, this is a whole new picture to me.
Yep. And
so I gave her a lot of credit, but initially I think she would have put me in that category of, of a downright mean pre-med advisor.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Makes sense.
And the reason I tell that story is because I think this is a point of reflection for the student too, to say, why do I feel like this? Why do I feel like that this pre-med advisor is overly negative or downright mean? What is it about our relationship? What has happened? Do I have any ownership in this? If not, great. If I do, what has occurred here? And I think we always have to take these reflection point times to say, what is my role in this? Relationships are two-way, and I think you constantly have to examine, what role I have had as an individual in this relationship, and why is it kind of turned out the way it has? Have I tried to repair, this relationship, or have I reached out or really had a gut level, discussion with the pre-med advisor or whatever? Because I know a lot of pre-med advisors around the country, and the ones I know, I think, we all have lamented in the past students who really, they came into the office, we told them something, they heard something completely different.
Yep.
And so their perspective was super skewed. And when you get right down to it in a conversation, you're like, that's not what I said. I said X, Y, and Z, and the student interpreted it as A, B, C. And it's not unusual. And I think that often students kind of hear what they want to hear, or they hear, they're hearing voices from outside, external voices. My friend said this, and so now I interpret it this way. So it's not to defend this particular pre-med advisor. I don't know who it is, but it is to say, take a role in sort of this relationship, and use this as an educational point in your life to say, why is this the way it is, and what can I do to potentially make a difference here?
Yeah, I love that. I wanted to kind of chime in and synthesize the two things you guys said, because I think what Ryan led with is absolutely right? We already know your last resort is you just don't get the committee letter, right? You already have that path ahead of you. So you're going to, for the next 8, 10, depending on, how much training you do after med school, have a lot, for these future years, you're going to have a lot of people who have power over you, who are your supervisors. And this is a chance to work on finessing those relationships. And maybe you've already tried, right? We don't know the context here. But just for anyone who's feeling similar listening to this question, I love to hear, Scott, what you said about not just the self-reflection, but the attempt to repair. People have bad days. Maybe he or she was just a little curt with you because their kid was sick. Maybe you'd asked a question a couple times before and you forgot that you'd asked it, but they were getting exhausted because you were making them repeat themselves. Maybe it wasn't even you. Maybe they'd answered that question 500 times that day and you just happened to be the 501st. I'm certainly guilty of that. Like sometimes I feel like I answered this before and it's not the same student asking.
Right.
And none of those things are excuses, right? I'm just saying sometimes you are correctly perceiving that something is off, but you are incorrectly internalizing it is about you when it's not about you. So, I mean, if you feel up for it, for this person asking or anyone in a similar situation, I think it could be interesting to try to get some FaceTime, whether that's in an office with masks or on a Zoom call, and see if some reparations are possible. One thing I've noticed with my advisors and mentors and supervisors over the years is a lot of times people who are under their power forget they're human. So even if it's just, how are you feeling? How's the weather? How are your kids? How's your mother? How's COVID going for your family? That might put them in a better frame of mind to talk to you.
Yeah. And I do think it's also important to recognize at the end of medical school, you're essentially getting a committee letter from the school in terms of support of your application to residency programs. And so this type of thing is going to go on for it's not going to end with your pre-med stuff. Like I said, it's structured a little bit differently. It's not quite the same thing, but it's similar.
Yeah.
So if you're student affairs dean at the medical school that you're graduating from, if you've got a really contentious relationship with the student affairs dean, the same thing could happen there. Albeit a little bit different in terms of the way it's structured, but so I think if you're the kind of person who has contentious relationships with a lot of people that are sort of somewhat in authority over you or whatever, this is self-examination time. This is self-awareness time to sort of begin thinking about what is, why do I keep having these situations with relational type things?
go to the Landmark form. I'll give a plug for Landmark, although with COVID, they're probably not doing very well.
Right.
Yeah, have you heard of Landmark, Scott?
No.
Oh, yeah, it's a little cult. It's fun.
It's
not a cult.
Is Landmark where you taught me about there's what happened and then there's the story you told yourself about what happened?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that nugget. I love that nugget.
Gotcha.
I tell myself a lot of stories, guys.
Yeah. Right. Landmark, the form is the first thing you go to, and then there's the advanced course, and then there's more. I've been to the advanced course and the form, and in the form you learn that you are a meaning-making machine. Like everything that happens, you make meaning about it, and so as Scott, as you were talking about, like if you have issues with like superiors and people of authority, that there's some sort of meaning you're making there, or that could be from very significant things from your past that you just we need to work through and get through. And so it was super powerful. I went at the end of 2019, and I think it's changed my life. I'm awesome. I'm a much happier person because of it.
Awesome. Awesome. We all benefit from that.
Oh God. I'm gonna not comment. Ryan, I love you and I like you. So we probably have time for one more. This has come up before, but it's one of those hot topics that's often on people's mind. And I think as we get closer to the end of the semester, it's resurfacing. Yeah. So even though it's an FAQ, here we go.
Yes. What are your thoughts on pass-fail grading during this very challenging semester? This has been by far my toughest semester because of all of the things that have occurred during this semester. So we chatted about this a little bit last week, Scott, of there's when the pandemic hit and when you were in that semester and kind of everybody moving home and schools closing and all of that stress versus now. Talk about the differences in how you see pass-fail and then versus now.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of schools in the spring were forcing pass-fail. You didn't have a choice. Everybody was, it was pass-fail, across the board. Some schools you could choose if you wanted to do pass-fail or you wanted to stay with grading. It was a variety of things. Now, I think we're into a little bit different ballgame now because ostensibly students should be getting used to sort of virtual schooling, and I'm a little concerned by what this particular student says. That this has been by far my toughest semester because of all the things. I don't know what the things are that have occurred this semester. If we're just talking about COVID or if we're talking about other things in your life that have affected this particular semester. And so, there's really not enough information to move forward. If it's still COVID related, then I'm a little concerned about that because we should kind of be transitioning into some understanding, some status quo type things. Yeah. If there are other things happening, then that sort of creates other issues that need to be discussed. What I would recommend is, you need to seek out someone at the institution, at your university, to discuss this with an academic advisor, your pre-med advisor, potentially counseling services, or there are, kind of a variety of resources available at most institutions where you can get advice on what you should do and how you should move forward. If it's all just COVID, if all you're talking about is COVID, I don't think it's a good idea to do pass-fail, exclusionary to everything else, because what it's going to look like is it's the toughest semester I've ever had. I punted and I just went pass-fail on everything. That I would, as an admissions committee member, I'd be very concerned about that. It would concern me that because that's not going to happen unless you're at a medical school that's pass-fail, which is not very normal. These across the country, that's pretty unusual for everything to be pass-fail. Unless you're at an institution that's pass-fail, then you don't have that option. You move forward with whatever grading system they have. And that's it. So Not enough information to make a total call on this question, but I definitely think it's a little concerning to me the way that it's put, and I mean,
life happens, right? And
absolutely,
obviously, there's COVID stuff, and then there's
other stuff.
Parents and siblings and healthcare issues, and so you add life on top of COVID, and obviously things can get out of hand. I think the general consensus, at least between the two of us, is if you're doing pass fail now, then that is looked at differently than pass fail in the spring.
Yeah, I agree. Now we did get an update, I think, from the student. Let me put it up there. Yeah, there you go.
Nontrad, work full-time, part-time caretaker of my grandmother who has Alzheimer's. She was in the hospital at the beginning of the semester. Right? See, life. Just
so
it's a lot.
Yeah, and I'm a Black male dealing with COVID and managing the emotional burden of situational things. I totally get it, and I think that's where I think really reaching out to some people you trust at your institution is really really important. That somebody that knows all the details and can really aid you. And and he says, so it would only be one course. So okay, then that makes a lot of that changes things for me. I think if it's just one course and you just you go pass fail on that course and you kind of explain it in your application, this particular semester not only was COVID happening, but this, that, and the other thing were going on, and I just didn't have many options. I think it's all in how you explain it, and then also, again, it's a point of reflection for you. What could I have done differently? Where am I responsible? How do I grow out of this? Because I think that's one of the focal points of any explanation. It's not the what I took pass fail on this particular course. It's the so what. What difference does that make in the way I move forward in the future? I did it this time, but in the future, when things like this happen, I've learned how to manage my time better or study differently or whatever. That's going to make a difference in the days ahead.
Awesome. I think that is a wrap for Ask the Dean episode 24.
Hard to believe. Wow.
Yeah,
crazy.
Half a year of doing this almost.
Oh my gosh. Unbelievable.
That's
Unbelievable.
Fun. That's fun.
Yeah, it is fun.
Are you tired of me yet?
No, of course not.
Well, everyone, thanks for showing up. And if you're watching this on a replay, don't forget to go check out Mappd, MAPPD, our amazing tech platform to help you through the pre-med process.
Yeah. Have a good night, Dr. Ryan Gray.
You too as well, Dr. Scott Wright.